everyone, welcome back to our Rocking Reservoir Waves podcast channel. Today, we will be bringing you to the second part of Unveiling Rock Physics, a journey from petrophysics to rock physics and beyond lecture series. If you missed out our first episodes, here's a recap. We have discussed about the realm of rock physics, uncovering how it bridges petrophysical and rock properties through elastic inputs. Now, as we move forwards, let's explore into the intricacies of this integrated and iterative petrophysics and rock physics workflow. Now, let's keep the momentum going as we continue with Akash on another fascinating subject, seismic petrophysics. As we embark on this journey, we'll uncover the key steps, challenges, and benefits of the seismic petrophysics workflow. So stay tuned as we navigate through the seismic waves, petrophysical intricacies, and everything in between. Let's begin by addressing the fundamental question. What exactly is the seismic petrophysics workflow, and how does it seamlessly integrate into our overarching petrophysics and rock physics framework?
Thank you, Ayn, for the question. So, before jumping to seismic petrophysics, let me start by first defining the petrophysics itself. So, we define petrophysics as the study of physical and chemical properties of rocks and their contained fluids. But the way petrophysics is performed could vary based on the workflows employed and also the objectives. As for any QI projects or quantitative interpretation projects, we need to perform rock physics modeling exercise, and therefore we need to perform seismic petrophysics instead of conventional or reservoir petrophysics. Let's first discuss on the difference between the conventional petrophysics and the seismic petrophysics. So the first difference between the conventional petrophysics and seismic petrophysics is what they are focused on. So conventional petrophysics focuses mostly on the reservoir interval, whereas the seismic petrophysics focuses on both the reservoir and non-reservoir intervals. The second difference between the conventional and the seismic petrophysics is on the data sources. So conventional petrophysics primarily relies on the measurements from logs and often neglecting the sonic log, whereas the seismic petrophysics uses the measurements from logs and it leverages both the sonic and the seismic data. The third difference would be on how the lithology is computed in each of the petrophysics workflow. In conventional petrophysics, it's mostly based on the rock volume, that is volume of shale and volume of sand, whereas in seismic petrophysics, it's based on the mineral content, that is volume of clay and volume of quartz is required for computation. Then another difference is on the consistency. So usually in conventional petrophysics, it might be challenging to achieve consistent interpretations across multiple wells because a lot of times single well petrophysics is carried on. But in seismic petrophysics, the first and the foremost thing is to check for the multi-well consistency and try to understand the discrepancy between different wells, if it's so, and try to relate them to the geology. So here we also try to integrate information from the seismic so that we can enhance our interpretation, accuracy, and consistency. And then finally, the difference between conventional petrophysics and seismic petrophysics lies on the goal. The goal of conventional petrophysics is on the computation of hydrocarbon pore volume, stock tank, oil in place, gas in place, etc. Whereas in seismic petrophysics, the goal is for understanding the seismic reflection and interpreting the rock properties from the seismic itself. So for seismic petrophysics, it's important that we pay close attention to the reservoir and non-reservoir interval so that we can assist the geophysicist when they are trying to invert for the petrophysical volumes from seismic. So for performing any rock physics exercise, it's important to check how good and consistent petrophysical volumes have been derived since it goes as an input for rock physics modeling. If the seismic petrophysics workflow is not carried out carefully, we might often end up producing incorrect rock physics results.
All right, Akash, please enlighten our listeners of the steps when performing seismic petrophysics work and walk us through why getting this right is crucial and what it involves.
Sure. Let me try to break down the steps for seismic petrophysics work. The first and the foremost step is to prepare a good data inventory sheet, understanding and taking note of what log curves are available and how good they are, whether they are good enough to proceed for accurate mineral volume porosity and fluid saturations. The second step is to perform multiple consistency check, perform log data QC and conditioning as required. Additionally, we should always try to assess the trend of sonic with other curves as per rock physics theory. Cross plots and histograms are good tools to visualize it. It's important that we only perform the log conditioning for the curves that are required for petrophysical evaluation exercise. Since one of the outputs from rock physics modeling are sonics, we don't touch them at this point. As mentioned in the previous podcast episode, rock physics is not a log conditioning exercise. Therefore, we do not touch the sonics at this step. In the third step, we have to perform a multi-well petrophysical evaluation. We need to compute the mineral volumes, that is volume of quartz, volume of clay, or some other minerals, instead of just computing the volume of sand and volume of shale. The fourth step in seismic petrophysics is to integrate in situ fluid properties from rock physics models into our petrophysical model. It's important to note that typical laboratory fluid properties measure isothermal properties, whereas wave propagation involves adiabatic properties. And therefore, whenever we are performing the seismic petrophysics, the fluid properties should come from the rock physics fluid models.
Okay, we're talking about multi-well consistency checks, log quality control, and playing nice with rock physics theory. Crossplots and histograms are in a mix. But hold on, why do we need to be choosy about the curves we condition? And what's the deal with leaving those sonics untouched until later?
It's a good question, Ayn. So the sonic response holds so much information apart from minerals, porosity, and pore fluid volumes that without considering the impact of spatial distribution of grains, pore shapes, and fluid distributions at subsurface condition, we won't be able to reach to the optimal value of sonics. And therefore, the optimal sonic values or the sonic response is only possible if we perform a proper rock physics modeling exercise using theoretical models.
Moving on to the step 3, we're talking about the multi-well petrophysical evaluation phase. You mentioned a shift from V sand and V shale to mineral volumes like V quartz and V clay. Could you give us a rundown on why this shift is so important and how it impacts the process?
Rock physics modeling requires good estimation of rock's frame. Rock's frame is composed of the rock's matrix, that is, rock's mineral constituents, spatial arrangement of grains, and pore shapes. So it becomes utmost important for any rock physicist to have focus on optimal estimation of mineral volumes like volume of clay and volume of quartz instead of rock volumes like volume of shales and volume of sands. There is a clear distinction between shales and clay or sands and quartz. Shales are composed of clay and other minerals. So here you can see clay is a constituent of shales and not the shale itself.
Now I am going to ask you about step 4. It's all about integrating in situ fluid properties into the petrophysical model, but with a catch, the isothermal versus adiabatic properties. Can you explain why this distinction matters and how it fits within the overall scope of this workflow?
In situ pore fluid properties vary substantially with composition, pressure, and temperature. Typical laboratory analysis of reservoir fluids yield the isothermal properties of the fluid's bulk modulus, whereas wave propagation involves a diabatic process or a diabatic properties are computed when a wave propagates. Since an acoustic wave passes rapidly through a fluid, the process is adiabatic and not isothermal. So pore fluids form a dynamic system in which both the composition and the physical phases change with pressure and temperature. Under completely normal in situ conditions, the fluid properties can differ so substantially from expected values that expensive interpretation errors can be made. Under reasonable exploration, pressure and temperature conditions, the isothermal values can differ from adiabatic by more than a factor of 2, as is mentioned by Johnson in 1972. So, to interpret, model, or predict seismic anomalies caused by oil, for example, the property of oil under reservoir conditions must be used. Oil in situ always contains dissolved gases. Both the density and velocity, or adiabatic bulk modulus, of live oil decreases with increasing gas oil ratio and can be significantly lower than those of equivalent stock tank oil. Measurements on dead oil are not adequate for modeling the velocities of oil saturated rock. The potential for seismic anomalies caused by oil saturated rocks is higher than thought because of the properties of oil under reservoir conditions can differ significantly from those of surface oils.
Last question before we close this episode. Could you elaborate on the significance of treating the initial petrophysical volume assessment as a starting point? How does this process, where these volumes feed into the rock physics modeling, play out? And when rock physics results come into the picture, how does this loop back to seismic petrophysics happen, leading to a reiteration of the volume assessment as our understanding deepens?
Yes, so the petrophysical volumes that we have computed, as I mentioned in our seismic petrophysics workflow, is treated as the first pass for the petrophysical volumes. These volumes are then taken as an input for rock physics modeling exercise. Based on the rock physics results, we would come back to these seismic petrophysical results and then reiterate on the volumes as we gain more understanding after our rock physics modeling exercise. So it works in an integrated and iterative manner with rock physics.
And that wraps up our second episode of the podcast. Thank you, Akash, for taking time to be with us today. We've taken a journey through the intricate world of seismic petrophysics, uncovering the steps and strategies that bring us closer to understanding the secrets buried beneath the Earth's surface. As we close this chapter, keep in mind that seismic petrophysics isn't just about numbers and data. It's about unraveling the geological story that spans millions of years. So, whether you're a petrophysicist, a geophysicist, or simply a curious mind, stay tuned for our next episode as we continue our journey through the captivating world of petrophysics and rock physics. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out via our website or social media channels. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep rocking.